Hello and welcome to the weekly edition of the Bubb Report. This week on our program, we take our virtual lens to the northernmost parish of Grenada. We'll be examining the role that sea level rise and an anachronistic citizenship by investment funded hotel project are playing in reshaping the landscape of what is dubbed Grenada's historic parish. The much-hailed Breakwater project, meant to protect the town of Sotez from being inundated with rising seas, seemingly has created a negative ripple effect down the coast in the communities of Mount Craven and Mount Rodney, which displaced as many as 8 families. More recently, the Grenada National Trust, in tandem with Jonathan Hanna, an archaeologist on the island, critiqued what they called the ill-conceived Breakwater project for causing the destruction of one of Grenada's richest archaeological sites. In this community, many of Grenada's first Kalinago settlers lived and thrived for centuries before being violently massacred by European colonizers. On the blog Grenadian Archaeology, Hannah states, quote, "Homes and businesses have been destroyed, as well as one of Grenada's most important archaeological sites, as seen through a continuous stream of human skeletons ripped by the waves into the sea. The archaeological site dates as early as AD 300, but the burials falling into the sea mostly date between AD 900 and 1200. Unquote. Over in St. Patrick East, the CBI investors who are funding the construction of the Grenada National Resort Hotel in Levera are moving ahead with plans to build a luxury project in very close proximity to Grenada's only Ramsar sites, which are sites solely designated for containing rare and unique wetland types, or for their importance in conserving biological diversity. Additionally, Levera Beach is home to one of the largest turtle nesting sites throughout the Caribbean, as hordes of leatherback turtles hatch there. This week, we look at the archaeological, historical, environmental, and human loss resulting from developments in St. Patrick. Also, as Grenada gets ready to celebrate 49 years as a politically independent nation, we take a trip down memory lane with one of Grenada's legendary playwrights, who will tell us about an upcoming theatrical production at the Laboucan Theatre in St. George's, which will reflect on Grenada's post-independence period through song, dance, and the spoken word. We welcome our guests, Joseph Andel, Member of Parliament for St. Patrick West, Jonathan Hanna, archaeologist, Francis Urias Peters of the Laboucan Creative Center, and Valentine Douglas, President of the Grenada Land Actors Advocacy Organization. And now, here is this week's editorial. We thank you for joining us.
A pleasant good morning to our viewers and listeners, and we welcome you to this week's edition of the Bubb Report. And now for this week's editorial. The retirement of Ruth Rouse as Grenada's top civil servant last week has caused us to take stock of the role of career government employees and their path to ascendancy in the public service. The sensitive and prominent role of the cabinet secretary has historically been mired in murkiness and palace intrigue, especially with the last administration. Now, former Prime Minister Dr. Keith Mitchell removed then Cabinet Secretary Gemma Bain-Thomas from the role within days of winning the 2013 general election. Bain-Thomas subsequently sued the previous government for wrongful dismissal, And now the Grenadian taxpayer is forced to fork up close to 1 million EC dollars to compensate Thomas for an ill-conceived and ill-advised decision by an elder statesman whose tally of bad decisions resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in court judgments against the state. However, Grenada's stellar cabinet secretaries have found themselves between a rock and a hard place. They are sometimes perceived as politically close to the sitting prime minister and his team. The late Nadeka McIntyre and former cabinet secretary Beryl Isaac were accused of being Keith Mitchell lackeys who lacked the courage to respect the rules that govern the separation of the politician from the policymaker. Beryl's famous "the fiscal space would not allow" refrain would go down in infamy as one of the most contentious moments between a senior public servant and a trade union workers' union in modern Grenadian history. Now, this brings us to the case of Carver Lett, who some are saying may be shortlisted to serve as the government's next cabinet secretary. If Lett is appointed to this prominent role, it would undoubtedly raise questions concerning her meteoric rise, that is, through the public service ranks. Unlike previous cabinet secretary, Lett only served as permanent secretary in one ministry following the June 2022 general election. And while Lett spent most of her career in the Customs and Excise Division in Grenada, some may wonder why other permanent secretaries with much more administrative experience than Lett were looked over. Again, the caveat here is we do not know whether or not Ms. Lett would in fact be appointed. What was the backstory, however, of her removal from the Customs and Excise Department? And what role did former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance Ophelia Wells Cornwell play in her removal? And then some have questioned whether or not a company associated with Lett acted as an alleged service provider of decorative services to the NDC in the last campaign. Public service rules under SRNO 27, number 56 state, quote, that an officer shall not, without prior approval of the commission, engage in any private work for remuneration, unquote. But while Lett may come under scrutiny in the coming weeks, the former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, Ophelia Wells Cornwell, has also come under scrutiny by former AG Cajetan Hood, who threatened a few years ago to file a complaint with Grenada's Integrity Commission, questioning the nature of her relationship with the elder Mitchell in breach of Part 3, Section 1 of the Integrity in Public Life Act, which says, quote, a conflict of interest arises from a situation in which a person in public life has a private interest, which is such as to influence or appear to influence the impartial or objective performance of his or her official duties, unquote. It is our hope here at the Bubb Report, however, that the next cabinet secretary would act more as the head of the public service, as a fierce guardian of the rules and codes of public life, and less as a political advisor to the country's head of government. And at this point, we wish to welcome our panelists for this week's program. We have Mr. Valentine Douglas, who is the president of Grenada Land Actors, as well as the Honorable Joseph Andel, who is the Member of Parliament for St. Patrick West and Grenada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as Dr. Jonathan Hanna, an archaeologist who has been doing extensive archaeological work in the St. Patrick area. Gentlemen, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Hi, morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, I want to begin with the Honorable Joseph Andel. Mr. Andel, first of all, I did not have the opportunity to formally congratulate you on winning the St. Patrick West constituency in the last election. Of course, during your last appearance on the Bubb Report, you were a caretaker candidate in that constituency. And we did ask you whether or not you were confident in your chances, to which you said yes. And of course, the voters seem to have reposed that confidence in you. So congratulations, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bubb. Thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you, my fellow panelists, and the entire audience a very happy, healthy, and money-filled 2023.
Money-filled, I like that. Prosperity, yes?
Yes. Yes. Sometimes we dance around the thing. It is not the be-all and the end-all, but it does play a significant role in one's material standard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Mr. Andel, before we get to the panel, in respect of your time, I'm aware that you're on a tight schedule today, so we thank you for making the time. Now, you just came back. You just attended the recent Community of Latin American States, in which Ralph Gonzalez was elected to serve in the rotating presidency for the next year. Now, he would be the first leader from the Eastern Caribbean to serve in that role. What were some of the significant outcomes of that meeting for Grenada and the OECS?
Well, first of all, you did mention the accession of Prime Minister Gonzalez, not just from the OECS, but from the entire English-speaking Caribbean region, the first non-Latin American head of government or state to hold that position. And he was unanimously supported by his CARICOM colleagues and the Latin American, South and Central American bloc plus Mexico. There were some good initiatives, especially at the bilateral level. One of the more significant ones is a fund that was initiated by the government of Mexico in collaboration with the government of Argentina, which aims to provide a level of financing for post-disaster recovery in the Caribbean region. There's always been a lot of talk about the fragility of, or the vulnerability of small island states to natural disasters and other phenomena, such as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a lot of lip service. Many countries, many organizations pledge financial support. But when the time comes for hands to go into pockets, I don't know if it's Parkinson's that causes the hands to miss the pockets. Mexico and Argentina themselves, developing countries, have decided that the time for talk is past. And so they have started off this fund, and we too in the Caribbean have the option of being able to contribute towards it so that in the event of disasters, we won't be starting from scratch.
Absolutely. All right. And that's important, of course, at the recently concluded COP summit as well. Climate mitigation funding was also a major issue. Now, your government suggested that the diplomatic corps was gutted by the previous administration and that you're training a cadre of new diplomats to serve. You've not appointed any diplomats yet, but you did, in fact, call for the previous diplomats to return to St. George's as part of a recall. But you did proceed with appointing one diplomat in the person of Glenn Noel. My research tells me that Mr. Noel has no service or experience in diplomacy, and he would be Grenada's envoy to Cuba. Talk about that decision, and can you give us a status update as to when we will be hearing announcements with respect to the appointment of diplomats to represent Grenada at its various consulates and embassies?
Yes, pardon me. Thanks for the opportunity to speak a little bit about this. So I'll begin with the appointment of Mr. Glenn Noel, who is a former cabinet minister. From the beginning, we did mention that our goal is to have a professional, career-oriented foreign service. And we also did mention that in spite of that, there will be some exceptions. So as you correctly said, Mr. Noel does not have direct experience in the diplomatic field, but he comes with a very rich background of community work. He has served as a political activist for all of his life. He has served as a senator and a government minister. And we think that the wealth of experience that he brings to the table will stand us in good stead. And you may have noticed that it's been 7 months and we have not yet appointed anyone or reappointed anyone. And that is very deliberate. I get calls, I get text messages all the time, man, hey, time for you to get rid of these NNP people and them and put in all and so on. And we wish to take a different path. First of all, even though there were the incumbent diplomats who were appointed by the previous government, for the main, they're Grenadians. And we believe that they served to the best of their abilities. I would like to take this opportunity to thank them for the service that they have given to our country over the past few years. One thing we must always bear in mind is that when you're dealing with human beings, you have to be careful that you do not hang people out to dry, that you do not cause professional embarrassment to people. And the fact that the previous government may have summarily recalled and sent home people who were appointed by their predecessors, that is not justification for us to go down the same road. In fact, we continue to have dialogue with all of the current diplomats, and I must say that they have been very cooperative. I've had no reason to believe that they have been engaged in any acts of sabotage or unpatriotism. And in fact, in the case of Senator Glenn Noel, he has been thoroughly briefed by the outgoing ambassador, Ambassador Clarice Charles. That would not have happened had we taken the heavy-handed approach of it's our time now, and so just dumping people unceremoniously. So one of the goals of the professionalization of the Foreign Service is that we have a pool or a cadre of people who are there to serve country and not party. And that whenever you have a change in administration, there will be a level of continuity in terms of Grenada's representation abroad. So we have already taken the steps. We have started to identify and to interview people for the different positions that are available. Of course, given the limited number of spaces, some people will necessarily be left out of the initial stage. But apart from the heads of missions, there will be opportunities for other people to serve as consular officers, as first secretaries, and so on, as trade attaches, people responsible for procuring investment and other opportunities for Grenada and Grenadians. So we're confident that we are on the right path. We are being very deliberate about the way that we're going about it, and we do believe that we'll get the correct results in the end.
Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG-10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.
Listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I will say. My good friend.
Yeah, and I put my head on a block and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC to do this poll?
Information because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said. Brilliant.
And Claudette, good luck with everything. You too, man.
No, may the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
But kill on.
Yes.
You is a tongue man too, so stop it up. Tell everybody you are a tongue man too.
We are a people who have always aspired for more, who've always aspired to do better, who've always accepted that not because your mother didn't go to secondary school, you should go. It has always been the other way around. You should aspire.
You've been there for a long time. Want to be queen of St. Andrews, but yet the problems around you you're not seeing. You can pray yourself out of the problems in St. Andrews.
And if you're not careful with how and what you say on radio, you will cause people to fight here.
I thrive on that controversy. Some people hate it, but I love it. In other words, every time something goes viral, it's about Kem Jones.
Some persons were getting pension after 2 terms in office, right? And the persons that work for 26 years plus not getting anything. It's just unfair.
God is good, and God looks after me. You know, not just my wife is no longer here, so both herself and the father up there are looking after me very, very well indeed.
Not a few people that you pick up by the side of the road to run in an election. These are not people that you mustered up and you pulled together a few months before you think an election is going to call and you say we want to win an election, so let's come together.
Very proud of what you're doing, and I think it's much needed. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you again for watching the Bubb Report. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you sincerely. Ashley, thank you so very much. Senator Chester Humphrey, welcome to the Bubb Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program. The Honorable Jumani Williams, we call him Jumani, who is the public advocate for the city of New York. The Honorable Baz Diopande, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pandey, welcome to the Bubb Report of Grenada. The Honorable Tobias Clement. Mr. Clement, welcome to the Bubb Report. Is it Nicolai or Nikolai? I hope I pronounced it.
Nikolai.
It's Nikolai. Thank you.
Yes.
And welcome to the program, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist. Mr. Randall Robinson, you are here in your private capacity and in your personal capacity. Yesterday, we learned that you were detained by law enforcement in Grenada. So you come from a family of public servants.
Yes, we are a family of public servants.
You're saying that you have to do more, but my question is, what have you done as President of the Union to ensure that that happens?
To the cards that I have drawn, that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are? Viewers, thank you for staying with us. We actually just suffered an internet outage here, and we are now back with you. I suffered an internet outage at least, and we will now proceed with the interview with MP Andel. Mr. Andel, I do apologize for that, but we're back.
Thanks, I had with technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And technological challenges also happen in the first world. It's not only flow in Grenada. But let us continue. With respect to the recall of some of the diplomats, you at one of your very first press conferences called for all of the diplomats to be recalled. Do you feel as if that was a bit short-sighted then, considering that might have left a void within for representation at some of our embassies and consulates?
No, it was not short-sighted at all. And remember that recall does not necessarily mean immediate physical departure from the premises or from the capitals where the missions are located. And it is a very natural and normal thing. As a matter of fact, even within the term of a diplomat, from time to time, they are called back home for consultations to be given new directives and so on. So there was nothing, I don't think that there was anything short-sighted or premature about it. And definitely there was nothing sinister about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And of course, you did mention the Honorable Clara Charles, former Ambassador Clara Charles, who served in Cuba. As a matter of fact, on her way out, she had to deal with an unfortunate crisis with respect to the death of a Grenadian citizen who was in Cuba at the time. So certainly diplomats, they perform an important function there. Now, former Foreign Affairs Minister Peter David, in his last appearance on the Bubb Report, now he suggested that Grenada, because Grenada does not have the capacity to have diplomatic representation in all corners of the world where Grenada's strategic interests might need representation, that is the function of sort of ambassadors at large, which is previous administration were able to appoint. Of course, some of these ambassadors at large came in for heavy criticism by your administration. But are you going to be proceeding with the same principles of appointing ambassadors at large to represent Grenada's interests in places where we do not necessarily have the resources for representation?
Good. So Mr. David did make a very valid point.
Yes.
It is very expensive to maintain those missions abroad. But sometimes it might be more expensive to not have them. It's like insurance. You may say, boy, it's too expensive to have insurance, but it might turn out to be more expensive not to have it. So we are open to the possibility of having people play those roles in some situations. However, the big issue is not necessarily Tom Jones being an ambassador at large or an ambassador with special responsibility for this region or that type of activity, but what is the remit of those people whom you are going to engage? If you simply call on someone and say, okay, I want to make you an ambassador responsible for this, and you do not give that one direction, that person does not know where your policy objectives lie, they have no specific remit, then you're really setting yourself up to achieve nothing. Somebody will have received a diplomatic passport, which will grant them a certain level of ease of travel, and the country doesn't get anything to show for it. So in instances where we may consider such types of appointments, we are going to be very, very clear. The objectives are going to spell out. There will be no room for guessing or for ambiguity. Whoever the person is will know what is expected of them. The reporting mechanism must be adhered to. One of the flaws of the previous dispensation was that many of these people, they were just given their passport, and I'm not going to impute that anything changed hands, but they had no specific mandate. They did not report to the permanent secretary or to whichever other officer or department that they're supposed to according to public service norms and so on. So this is something that we have already taken steps to correct. The line of communication clearly established, and everyone will know what he or she is responsible for and to whom he or she has to report directly.
Mm-hmm. Now, correct. Would those people be non-Grenadians? The argument that your leader, the Prime Minister Mitchell, has made is that Grenadians have to fit those roles. Except Mr. David also counter-argued, however, that Mr. Deacon Mitchell, who was the Grenada the Consul General on behalf of the Netherlands,
the honorary consul.
The honorary consul of the Netherlands was not a Dutch citizen, but yet he represented the Netherlands.
Those things are comparing mangoes and golden apples. An ambassador is totally different from an honorary consul. Honorary consuls, they provide consular services to the nationals of the sending country, and they are not full-blown diplomats. In fact, usually those services are provided gratis, maybe when they have to travel or certain things that they may have to implement, the country sending them will take care of the expenses. But to say that an honorary consul is the same as a duly appointed ambassador, that is beyond stretching it. Not only Honorable Deacon Mitchell served in that capacity as honorary consul representing the Netherlands. We have people representing the Kingdom of Spain. We even have someone representing our neighboring country, Trinidad and Tobago, right here. So these are two totally different things. And we will ensure that the people who we appoint as ambassadors, as much as is practicable, are Grenadian citizens. Yeah. In fact, if you go back a little bit to the Cheltenham report that surrounded the so-called briefcase scandal, that was one of the...
I call it the briefcase report, but...
Okay. Yeah. Good old Louis Vuitton, yeah? Right, but one of the most salient recommendations coming out of the report was that we engage as much as possible nationals and that there be no quid pro quo as it relates to diplomatic appointments. That is where you leave yourself open to being compromised and to suffering great embarrassment.
Absolutely, and we would respect your time, but one final question on foreign affairs and diaspora matters. Of course, you will be here in North America, I believe, next week to observe Grenada's 49th anniversary of independence with the folks in New York. Unfortunately, I would not be there because I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. Not a lot of activities for us here, but I digress. Now, within weeks of winning the last election, Mr. Andel, your government shut the Office of Diaspora Affairs in St. George's. Now, what structure would replace the office? Now, given the role that it played in developing a 5-year action plan on national diaspora engagement. Now, in fact, it was the previous NDC administration under the leadership of your colleague in St. Patrick's, the Honorable Tillman Thomas, as Prime Minister, who envisioned a diaspora office, who envisioned diaspora engagement in the way that it was outlined. So would there be any replacement, or is there any plan to reopen that office at all?
Well, first correction, that the office has never been shut down. The physical location of it was moved. There were some issues with leakages and electrical problems that were identified even from the days of the previous administration. So it is no longer where it was housed previously. Okay. What happened was that the contracts of the people who worked there expired just around the time of the election. In fact, a few of them were on month to month. And so at the expiration of the contracts, we thanked them for their services and they moved on. In the meantime, we have people from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade manning that office, doing routine administrative stuff. And we are also in the process of reviewing the way that office will operate and how we can fashion it in such a way that Grenada and our sisters and brothers who reside in the diaspora derive maximum benefit from its operations. Mm-hmm. So very soon, in the same vein that we are vetting people, even still at this moment, I'm receiving expressions of interest in the Foreign Service. We will be staffing and equipping that office to ensure that it delivers on its mandate.
Okay. And we have a quick viewer question before we get to, before we bring in the rest of the panel. Someone is saying, can the minister provide clarity on the mission office in Florida in light of the Newfield Kiwana Bay Government of Grenada issue before the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes? Any
Okay, good.
updates there?
Yes, Mr. Newfield is no longer associated with the Miami consulate. In fact, his resignation was very publicly tied in with the apparent fallout between his company and the previous administration. However, the consulate continues to operate, and this, along with all of our other missions, is one that we are looking closely at in terms of staffing and what we expect to get out of each of those missions.
Okay. All right. Very well. And now we will quickly segue. And at this point, I wish to bring in the other panelists because they are doing work that is closely tied to what's happening in your constituency. But Mr. Andal, what we want to talk about is the Breakwater project. Now, you as an activist caretaker candidate before the election, you held protests. You were a leading advocate on behalf of some of the families and communities that were unfortunately displaced as a result of the fallout from the Breakwater project downstream. We're talking about communities in Darby, and I believe, is it, I don't want to get the name, it's not Mount Ridge.
Mount Alexander.
Mount Rodney. Mount Alexander, Mount Rodney. There we go. All right. Now that you are on the other side and in government, how realistic do you believe it is to make some changes and adjustments to the Breakwater project, notwithstanding the damage that it continues to inflict in St. Patrick?
Yes, we do not have a choice. And dwelling on the past will not help us very much, except for the point of view of learning lessons and knowing what not to do. Mm-hmm. So our focus now is trying to retrieve the situation as best we can. And we have budgeted approximately $27 million in this budget cycle for restorative and mitigating work to be done in and around the Breakwater and the surrounding communities. We have to ensure, though, that even though the situation is dire and needs immediate attention, that we proceed in a manner that does not exacerbate the problems that we have. So notwithstanding, I said that we're not dwelling in the past because the execution of the project left a lot to be desired, and we do not want to repeat those mistakes. So we are going to ensure that we engage the professionals with the know-how, but we are also going to engage the locals, because very often we look to experts to solve problems, and we forget the people who have lifelong experiences of living in those areas. So we are going to take their views on board. We are going to ensure that they are properly consulted and that what they say, once it is feasible, will be incorporated into whatever corrective measures we plan to take.
Well, let's bring in the experts here. Let's bring in one of those experts. Dr. Hannah, you heard MP Andal here, Minister Andal. How do you react to what he said?
Yeah, well, I'm glad. Thanks for having me on the show, by the way.
Absolutely. Welcome. Welcome, Dr. Hannah.
Nice to meet you both.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I applaud Minister Andal for wanting to take immediate action. I think that's a given. It's almost an easy win in a lot of ways because it's not a problem you created, so you don't have to deny that it's happening as previous administrations did, and you just have to fix it. And we kind of know what needs to happen. There have been some studies, at least we know the path to take. So I'm glad to hear you have a plan and there's a budget set aside. I think there's going to need to be more money set aside, but that's a good start. There was issues, I think, with the amount of money the actual Breakwater itself cost. I mean, I don't forget, but they said it cost like $4.6 million, which is absurd. It probably cost $0.6 million and $4 million, who knows where. that went. If they had actually spent 4.6 million, they should have done an EIA. They should have done all these studies, and they would have known that was a terrible place to put this thing, and what would happen. I mean, I could just go over some of the issues just generally. I know Val from Land Actors could speak to some of this, but there was no EIA done. There was no impact assessment. And that's also, just across the way in Levera, there's a similar project. There was a insufficient EIA done, but a similar problem. So you have this disaster over in Salters Bay is really a bellwether of everything that's going to be happening in the future. I mean, if we don't manage these things properly, if we don't take the time to study them and develop thoughtfully, we're going to just continue to have these problems. And Levera is a case where that needs to happen. And I know this isn't the minister's constituency, but I mean that's another thing.
But he is a patrician, so I suspect he would be concerned about everything that happens throughout the entire constituency. By the way, Minister Handel, we have been trying to invite your colleague MP in St. Patrick East, Mr. Dennis Cornwall, to appear on the report. Kindly telegraph, please, that we need him to speak to matters in his constituency of a similar nature. But you heard what Mr. Hanna said here, right? And these are the concerns that has been happening with respect to EIAs not being done, or processes that are rushed. Are these issues you're discussing in the cabinet, concerns that you're bringing to the cabinet?
Yes, definitely. I live, in fact, I'm located right now in Mount Alexander, which is just literally a couple 100 meters away from where all of the destruction is taking place, and you see it happen before your eyes. So I have a personal stake in that too. Now, small countries like Grenada, we face a developmental dilemma. And we have to balance very carefully, very thoughtfully, the needs for economic activity that will generate income and employment for our people against the need to protect our natural patrimony. And we have to make sure that we don't go in for a penny today and we leave future generations holding the bag down the road. So it is a very delicate question, a very delicate balance between what type of development you want to pursue, where you want to pursue it, how you want to pursue it. Balancing the need for financing on the one hand against the need to protecting our environment and to mitigating against whatever damage may come across. And one thing that is almost inevitable, development always leaves scars, always causes some form of dislocation or some form of disruption to nature. If you build a house, you probably have to do some excavation and so on. So I don't believe that any reasonable person would say no to development in a blanket way. The question is, how do we balance it in such a way that whatever negative mark is made is minimal? Yeah.
Well, Mr. Hanna, and of course we have a question here. Someone is saying, would there be an EIA before any work is done on the SBWP? I'm not too sure what that is. Are you familiar with that project there?
Probably the St. Patrick Breakwater project, I imagine.
I guess that's what they're talking about. Right, it must be, but of course, but as you said though, Mr. Hanna, there was no EIA done. That I happen to have read your report. I believe that also informed your dissertation, Mr. Hanna, and you critiqued the previous administration for essentially behaving recklessly, not taking the advice of what was recommended with respect to that project.
Right, of their own laws, even. I mean, why do we have these laws? I mean, this is why Land Actors is currently in a suit against the government, now the new government, but because these EIAs were not being being followed. Like, we just want them to follow their own laws, and if they're not going to do it, then you need people to stand up and do that. I mean, it's not even, I mean, this breakwater it's so obvious. It should be, you know, they say they're going to build a breakwater at the base of Leapers Hill. That should be a red flag. Children in Grenada, that's a red flag, the base of Leapers Hill. What is Leapers Hill? It's where a bunch of Amerindians jumped off the cliff, right? And then attacked by the French in 1649. Why was there no archaeology done at the base? If we're gonna just, like, there's questions even about whether that hill that we designate as Leapers Hill is the real place, right? Well, now we can't answer that question because, I mean, maybe there wouldn't be bodies, but there might, like, skeletons in that spot, but there might be materials they were carrying. You can never know what you're going to find when you excavate, right? Or what you're going to find out is actually more important, right? But they've destroyed the possibility of doing that. You know, for a small amount, we could have done some underwater archaeology there and checked it out first. It was also already a coral reef. They built a whole bunch of concrete and stones on top of a whole coral reef marine environment. That was not a great idea, right? And then, years before, there had been a huge study of the lower Saltaires by the OECS. It was actually a RRAC report, reducing risks against climate change, something like that. Beautiful report, huge study. Didn't really take into account all the heritage aspects. It didn't really mention the archaeological site, but it talks about people's livelihoods, talks about the things to do to mitigate the encroaching, the heavier, rougher seas, and never said anything about a breakwater under Leapers Hill. They recommended a breakwater out by the lime kiln, the Rodney Bay lime kiln, and several other measures, including planting lots of mangroves and replanting trees. So that was all just ignored.
Except the previous administration would say that they had to protect, and of course it was sort of a Faustian bargain. They had to protect the entire town of Saltaires, which was being inundated by rising seas. But of course, Mr. Andel does have to go, so I want to accommodate one last question, and then we'll get back to you, Mr. Andel. Mr. Andel, a viewer is asking, we heard that there were funds left over from the last project. I suspect that's the Breakwater project. If there is, can you tell the amount? Is there?
I'm not aware of anything to that effect. But if there is any money and if there was proper accounting, then it should be available, and it should be available to roll over into whatever mitigating measures that we take. And the whole fiasco of this breakwater must awaken in us an awareness that when you do things with political considerations being your primary motivation, you're very likely to make these types of missteps. And even though the problem it was an imminent threat to Saltaires, that does not mean that you would just go like a headless chicken into something like that. No one disputed that Saltaires needed some form of protection. But when you're doing things, especially when you're going to be talking about people's lives and livelihoods, where you're going to be spending millions of hard-earned taxpayers' monies, it is incumbent upon the decision makers to think wisely, to engage the people with the requisite expertise, and to ensure that you keep the communities involved and informed, and then you're more likely to get a better outcome than just rushing into something in that sort of willy-nilly manner.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Mr. Andel, respecting your time, any final comments from you before, of course, Mr. Douglas, I was reading a piece from the blog post from Grenada Land Actors. They're not necessarily fans of your administration's approach to how you are looking at environmental issues. But Mr. Douglas, we will get to that. But I do want to give Mr. Andel an opportunity for some closing comments before we continue.
Okay.
Mr. Andel?
Yes. Well, I think that there are opportunities for the land actors and all other interested parties to work with government. At the end of the day, we are the policymakers. It is not in our interest, nor in the interest of the country, for us to be antagonistic, even though we may have divergent points of view or different approaches towards approaching the same problem. So I, for one, will welcome the opportunity for dialogue with the land actors. I met Dr. Hannah a couple of years ago at a ceremony at a Far Community Center. I could not stay long at that time. And I wish to commend you and Peter and Twine and others for the sterling work that you have been doing in the St. Patrick area. I hope that I get the opportunity to collaborate with you. You did speak, Dr. Bubb, about my impending visit to the New York area.
Yes.
I look forward to it very much, to interacting with our citizens abroad. Just one request, please turn the temperature up a little bit. I'm kind of allergic to cold weather. We look forward to some.
I turned the temperature up on the Bubb Report. I can't speak for other climatic issues.
Yes, so looking forward to the engagement with our citizens in the New York area. We're also in the process of trying to get someone to Toronto to celebrate with our sisters and brothers in Canada. And I just wish to thank you for the opportunity to be on this program this morning. It's a pity that other commitments caused me to have to run away. I commend people like Dr. Hannah and the Grenada land actors for doing the type of voluntary work that is needed. Too often we leave everything up to government, and government is made up at the policy level of politicians. Many of us may not even have expertise in any particular area. So we depend on a professional public service and on citizen activism to help in the governance process. Once we continue to give citizens the opportunity to engage, then our country can only benefit from that. So thank you very much, and I wish my fellow panelists a good interview for the rest of the day. All the best to you, Dr. Bubb, and your listeners and viewers.
Absolutely, Mr. Andala, and thank you for living up to your promise to appear on the Bubb Report. I was worried there for a second because you know you are a guy who sticks to your commitments, at least in my engagements with you. Unlike your previous, unlike your rival candidate in the last election, Bello is his name. He gave us a commitment.
That's my former student. Maybe his hands were tied. I don't know.
Well, I hope that your hands would not be tied by your boss.
No. We have a very, very good collegial relationship, mutually respectful, and a very, very, really good environment that we're operating in.
All right, Mr. Andal, thank you so much. I know that you have to attend to your constituency and constituency matters, so thank you for appearing on the Bubb Report. Panelists, we will continue with the conversation now. And Mr. Douglas, you are the president of the Grenada Land Actors organization. Now, on your organization's website, you write, quote, "Is NDC choosing the same strategy as the previous administration," unquote. In the article, you state, quote, "Mount Hartman, Liverer, and Lasajas have joined the Planning and Development Authority, represented by the Attorney General, who is now, the office is now occupied by Claudette Joseph, in opposing the matter and attacking the GLA on the issue of standing. Now, in a legal sense, standing is the legal right for a particular person to bring a claim in court. When there is a matter of public interest such as this one, legal standing allows local persons to access to the courts to ensure that laws are being upheld and that oversight and transparency are being maintained through informed public participation in environmental decision making." Are you disappointed, Mr. Douglas, in the fact that the government joined two private entities in opposing the motion you brought before the courts?
The government had the opportunity to address this issue before proceeding further. We had written to the Attorney General, Claudette Joseph, requesting an audience because we believe that at the point when the new government came into office, there was an opportunity to deal with something, a right that all Grenadians should have, all Grenadian organizations should have. And that is the right to address matters of national interest. And when we find government in violations of their own rules and regulation, that we should have the right to address it in a court of law. We did not get that audience with the Attorney General Joseph. So there was clear disappointment in that lack of response. We continued. The judge in this case had ruled in our favor, and he ruled that we had standing to proceed with the case. The government and the other parties joined to appeal that decision. And I'm not sure of the motive, because the appeal was 6 months after the judge's decision. It was heard by the Court of Appeal 6 months after. And that was on September 22nd. And we have not had a determination since. And we're heading into February at this point. The Court of Appeal is supposed to visit Grenada in February, and hopefully we will have some determination at that point. But the motive could be a delay to the detriment of Grenada. And so we are disappointed.
Yes, you say you're disappointed. Of course, Justice Glasgow, who is a friend of the labor movement in Grenada, because he ruled in their favor on the pensions issue, also ruled in your favor. So it's quite surprising to learn that that government sided with those CBI investors in that matter. But let me bring back Dr. Hannah here. Now, Dr. Hannah, you in your report on what is happening up there in St. Patrick, you said that, of course, we know that climate change is an issue there, but you said that the high breaking waves are not merely climate change. They are the result of an ill-conceived and poorly planned government Breakwater project. You then went on to say of the previous administration, quote, had more thought been put into this thing, they would have known that the currents change between the rainy and dry seasons. And thus, come the next dry season, the swells would be concentrated and directed towards Mount Craven, a small beach community just west of town, causing catastrophic damage. But they didn't. And then they ignored it and sat on their hands while the destruction continued unabated. Now, Mr. Hannah, when we talk about this destruction, you recently highlighted the scope of this archaeological destruction by noting the amount of skeletal remains that are now being unearthed in that area. Can you talk about the work you've been doing in that area and the scope of the skeletal remains you're seeing on the beaches that are now being unearthed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive, well, it's a massive cemetery, which, you know, is a rare and important thing. We don't find these that often. Even for the time period, it's unique. By that time, most of the burials date between 9 and 1200 AD based on the radiocarbon dates. There's a lot more we're trying to do to figure out more because there's so many burials. And so there's some DNA studies going on. So far, they're all Amerindian. And so far, the radiocarbon dates have backed up about between 9 and 1200 AD. That's a really interesting time period. A lot of things are changing in the region during that. You get new ceramics, probably a new migration of people from South America. And then that's also the time when you start to see the petroglyphs show up. About after 750 AD is really when they start to show up in Grenada, and the work stones. So there's a change in sort of rituals and beliefs. And then a lot of the burials we find from that time period are usually under houses. These sort of like large burial grounds are more common in the earlier period. But once we actually interpret it as sort of an increase in ancestral worship. So you're now trying to access your ancestors more, actually going back and retrieving bones and such as a way of getting in touch with your ancestors. And so usually they're buried under houses during this period. So it's interesting that you see this huge cemetery. It has to do with preservation, and it's just in a our bones are made of calcium carbonates, and it's similar material to shells. And so the acidity on the beach is more basic and alkaline than inland. So inland soils are more acidic. Our bones just dissolve, and so you don't find burials from 1,000 years ago. But it's just so it's really great preservation for that. And so when people see these, when people first started seeing these skeletons washing out, they thought they were recent. That's how well preserved they are, and most of them are. They're really fast. Most of them are, completely intact. Like the bones are all articulated exactly as if, the bones it was a person buried, right? It's not just a jumble of bones or something that was disturbed. But oftentimes there is like one bone that's just in a really random place, or it's missing a skull or something, and or the skull. One of the ones we excavated, the skull was in the pelvis. So like a fully articulated burial, but then one bone was probably accessed later in time and then put back, but not in the right place, right? Mm-hmm. But you can only tell that by actually excavating it properly and documenting it. And so with these things just washing out to the sea like that, we lose just a tremendous amount of information. And not to say that they shouldn't be buried eventually, but we should learn from these things. Once they're gone forever. I would like to see, once we do a bunch of these studies with DNA studies, we have things on stable isotopes, talk about diet that shows up in bones, strontium, which is where they were born, or tells you where they grew up when their adult teeth came in. So super interesting stuff, and radiocarbon dates, and also analysis of the bones, age of death, age of time of death, cause of death, things like that. But then eventually I would love to see sort of some of these reburied in a monument, maybe a more appropriate monument at Leapers Hill, for instance. And that would be that would probably be a more appropriate, eventual place.
Let us talk about the scope of these burials. You say they're under houses, but looking at big picture in the context of what we know today as sauterres, of course. Perhaps during the pre-colonization era, the First Nations peoples of Grenada probably called that area another name, right? We don't know that because, of course,
it wasn't sauterres, yeah.
it was not sauterres. That is a French colonial invention, as we know. But are these graves? I guess are these burial sites concentrated in specific areas? Are you able to extrapolate from where they are, whether or not it's a mass grave or whether those individual graves associated with the residences where people lived?
Oh, well, yeah. It's debatable because we don't have a lot of great data. A lot of it is like rescue missions like I just did 2 weeks ago. That burial was just falling into the sea and it will disappear. There we saw several others, but it's completely a volunteer thing. We have to take time out, and it's an enormous amount of work and data. That one day in the field is a couple weeks of work later on to putting things together and writing it and analyzing. So it's hard. It's just it's better just to protect this kind of thing than have to run in there and just salvage it. But we do think it's a cemetery, just based on the way they're placed. And I don't even know if they're really below houses. There was one post hole in an excavation from the 90s. When they were first excavated in 1994. But it's debatable what's really happening because the time period, all of sauterres and lower sauterres especially, is just a big archaeological site. There's stuff all over. And we have the evidence for the actual village is further back along the river on the western side of the river, or at that time, 9 to 1200 AD. So the Karen hypothesis is that is just a place they're burying people at that time. I could be wrong, or we have to do more studies, but like back on a little bit further back in like the cocoa fields, you have similar radiocarbon dates, and you have a more diverse midden. You have more like the type of vessels we're finding there are more utilitarian and kitchen kind of midden stuff. Where there's a hearth that was found there, dates to that time period. But across the river, under lower sauterres on the eastern side, as some of the earlier stuff. So you can almost see the village migrating over time. People were probably living there seasonally and back and forth, and village, we're talking over 1,000 years of people living on this landscape. The actually earliest dates we have now are as early as 300 AD. So it's one of the earliest sites now. And then all the way to 1650 with Leapers Hill. That's 1,300 years of people living and also dying in this landscape. And so the cemetery there, I mean, it's akin to digging Marley Hill or something in 1,000 years, or Cemetery Hill in St. George. What would that look like to people in 1,000 years from now? It would look like this. So it's not a mass grave.
Not wanting to cut you, but I want our viewers to visualize, if you will. We're looking at a map of Sotez now here. If you can just point out on the map the impact area of sorts. I mean, you can't see it. This is just
well, right by Mystic Design there is sort of there's some earlier stuff, and all along there. We haven't checked out McDonald College enough. I'd love to do a little bit like a surface collection there and see what I've heard. There's artifacts up there. I'd like to know a little more of the time period. That could be part of the village that was attacked, in 1650. Otherwise, it's most likely closer to where the playing field is, and all the burials are all along that Mount Craven beach from see the river on there, but all the way up. Where it says Red Line, Grenada, and the beach along there, that's all a cemetery. And just the way, there's lots of houses on top of it today, but they weren't invasive. There's not a lot of excavation done. And so, it protected the burials actually. And so the fact that they're washing out now is testament that it's never happened before, because they wouldn't be there, right? And then once they're gone forever. So it's something we really, really need. I actually would like the minister to ideally declare it a disaster area, because so many families, and within the next month you're going to see more houses falling, and as this dry season even though it's not a super dry season, it's the swells have changed as they always do, and we'll lose another meter or two of beach and houses and people's lives lost there. And so, and then in April, it's going to come back. It's going to switch, and you're going to see a little regrowth of the beach. And then, I mean, that's what happened in 2017 when they finished the Breakwater. Everyone thought, the town was saved, everything is perfect, but they didn't know that it was about to get so much worse on the other side. And yes, they needed to protect the town, but I mean, don't make it worse. What they did was funnel all the energy over to the other side, and then they did sit on their hands. Nothing happened. Year after year, it's been 5 years. 5 years, and when you go there, it's hard not to get emotional. I mean, it's such a dramatic, intense scene of just waves crashing over people's, the remnants of people's houses and trees falling, and then all of these skeletons falling. It's this really surreal scene. So for nothing to be done for this long is appalling.
Yeah. No, this is absolutely important work and research you've done. And we have a comment here from Peter Antwine, who is actually from St. Patrick as well. He's saying Leapers Hill and Sotez Bay need to be declared a heritage and archaeological protected and heritage preservation site. We have the laws already on the books to achieve this in short order. Shouldn't that have been done in retrospect years ago?
Yeah, I would love to see this present government actually put aside a lot of places that we thought were protected. I mean, Mr. Antwine is right that the site is technically it's protected by the Museum Act, but we really need there to be a schedule of sites that are protected. And like he's saying, if we designate it as a disaster zone, and there's a program out there called Sites of Conscience, and Leapers Hill has been proposed as one place to be recognized, we would get support from UNESCO. UNESCO even has an emergency fund, and if it was declared a disaster zone, we would be able to access those funds. And the same thing with just like hurricanes, and when you declare a disaster zone, there's more aid that's available. So that's a great way of bringing in interest, and then of course there's the issue of doing it properly, and and this continuing elsewhere at Levera and such, that it needs to be properly done. Actually, Levera should have. Everyone thought it was a national park, right? Like, when did that happen? It's suddenly not.
Except very soon it will be a national hotel. I do not know that we can still call Liver a national park if we're going to be putting.
But it was like everybody treated it as a
there.
national park. It was called a national park by the government. There were civil servants, managing. There were management plans. It was set aside as a Ramsar site, as a marine protected area. Mr. Valentine Douglas could talk about this more.
Yeah.
At what point it wasn't a national park, and yet all of a sudden it could be sold. I would say that was an illegal sale. How could you signal to the public and everyone believe it's a national park, and then suddenly, just because it wasn't gazetted somehow? That's just bizarre to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with Cameron Park and many other places that should be protected. Pearl's archaeological site. Why is that not listed? Everybody knows what's there. So yeah, we need to protect these things. I think it's we have an ethical, even moral responsibility to protect these things that have survived against all odds, because there's only so much left. Most things were destroyed. Probably 99% of everything that was here is gone. And just these little bits of ceramics and bones that we have are a fraction of what actually was there. And there's so much that we don't know and that we could learn from that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And let me bring in Mr. Douglas. And of course, we would segue now to the other part of St. Patrick to have a conversation around what's happening at Livera. Now, Mr. Douglas, the developers, both in Las Vegas and Livera, would say, well, they have completed their environmental impact assessment. And certainly in the context of Livera, they would say that the environmental impact assessment study points to the fact that minimal damage would be done to the national park in that vicinity. Have you had conversations with the particular consultant who was hired by the CBI hotel developers in Livera about their EIA and what that looks like in relation to the impact that it would have on that part of the country?
We have not had any direct conversation with the EIA, Niles and Associate EIA, for the Livera project. There was a public presentation in St. Patrick's, I think it's back in 21, I'm not sure, probably sometime in 2021, where the general public was invited and members of our organization went there, and basically what was presented is some blurry pictures, some written in Chinese, as to what the park would be. What we have seen since is that EIA was filed by Niles and Associates. And upon reviewing the EIA, we have some issues with it concerning the integrity of the EIA process. It seems as though the EIA was lacking in many respects. We have observed data that is either outdated or not sourced. So we don't know how they would come to certain conclusion. We have observed pictures, photos of the marine area that does not correlate with what dives in the area have revealed. So we don't know whether or not these pictures were generically meant to show what a coral reef was, or what a sea urchin was, or some form of thing within the ecosystem, or was it just a picture for demonstration purposes? Mm-hmm. The EIA process, and if I were to get a definition from an expert in EIA, is Dr. George Sammy from Trinidad. He basically said EIA is a planning tool which seeks to incorporate environmental considerations into decision making by predicting impacts on scientific basis and prescribing mitigation methods. So we haven't seen any scientific data coming out of that EIA process. What we have seen is a lot of gaps, a lot of matters that are not being addressed. For example, there's a golf course that's going to be being done there before the actual resort, and none of the impact of the golf course is addressed in that EIA. And as you know, a golf course has a lot of adverse effect on an environment. The golf course, I don't know exactly how many acres it would be, but clearly the use of fertilizers and other materials on the course would be going down into the sea somehow. If it rains, we know that the soil may absorb a certain amount of water, but 1 inch of rain is the equivalent of 27,000 gallons. And if we have a golf course of 10 acres and the soil is saturated, all of these runoff, where is it going to go? We have problems with certain statements that were made in the EIA, and I think needs to be addressed. For example, they talk about the water supply and waste disposal system, and the EIA mentions the following facilities are provided in the plan and scheme. And they said, according to them, potable water is provided to the area by Nawasa main lines and a reverse osmosis plant. Reverse osmosis plant is desalination plant, really. They said water pumps are provided in the plan to facilitate water supply from the main water lines. They went on to say in item 2, a package plant is proposed for sewage disposal. EIA has to be a plan of action, what you would do. It's not a statement of what they would have there. A package plan does not mean anything unless you describe the plan of action that goes with it. Then they went on to say the developer will cooperate with local companies in Grenada for harmless treatment of solid waste generated from construction and daily operation. Here again, this is another statement. It is not a plan. It does not tell us what will happen. Fourth item on that list about waste and supply disposal system says septic tanks are provided where necessary. So does that give us any location where septic tanks going to be, what impact it's going to have on the environment? If it's not necessary to have a septic tank, would there be a latrine? You know, these statements, you know, make us feel like, I know I'm one generation ahead of you, Dr. Bubb, but when I was a schoolboy, there was a famous saying, you know, what is joke for school children is death for crapo, which means that the environment becomes the crapo here, you know, and it's sickening. You see the golf course here, that clearing, and what happens here, natural vegetation was destroyed, indigenous plants were, you know, cleared, and what are you going to replace it with? Invasive species that may not work there. This is the most one of the most arid locations in Grenada. The other is down south at Point Saline. The water needed to maintain a golf course there is going to be problematic. If you do a desalination plant, what happens with the brine? Are you going to dump that brine back in the sea? Brine is heavier, it has a higher density than salt water. It's going to be deposited on the floor. What happens with our ecosystem? They talk about a jetty. If you're going to locate a jetty, they're going to move the jetty 100 feet from where it was proposed. That is to avoid the beach and into a more westerly area. If you have a jetty with the currents and everything, are you going to have to dredge to accommodate ships and stuff like that? Is that channel going to create a current that is going to destroy the beaches and down environment, a lot of matters are not being addressed in this EIA. So this EIA does not cut it. And, I was hopeful that the minister, when he made his remark about they're going to address the problem, I applaud him and I applaud the effort that they're going to do. But if they were going to conduct an EIA for the Surtees Bay again, we have some issues to be addressed. And some of the issues are the matters that we are planning to litigate in our case against the government. The planning authority does not have terms of reference or guidelines for EIA as it exists now. The government passes acts here, acts there, but they're not regulations or guidelines. And I would like to know, when would this administration develop the guidelines and regulation that goes with the 2016 Planning Act? Because that would be of paramount importance as we proceed and address environmental issues. And we are willing to meet with government and government ministers, but we know they're busy. They're much more busy than we are. So we are waiting for the invitation.
All right. Yes. Continue, and then we'll quickly get to what's happening at La Sagesse there as well. But go ahead.
Right. One more point I wanted to make is that most of these projects come with this sales and marketing pitch that there'd be jobs, and I want to quote from the EIA, and it talks about the core hotel complex, and it said that the hotel complex would cover an area of 982,745 square feet. And it says consists of primarily conference section, a casino, and a golf club, 3 hotel towers, restaurants, and various duty-free retails, right? Then they said the 3 towers would have 55,417 square foot. Then in the same EIA, they said staff dormitories. Hotel staff accommodation is provided by 5 3-story dormitory buildings located near the junction of the existing main road and the branch road leading to the frontal plaza, with a total square foot of 101,826 square feet. Now, Grenadians need to ask this question. If you have in a dormitory that is 100,000 square foot and you're having a hotel space of 500,000 square foot. So calculation leads up to about 15% of being for dormitory. So who is going in the dormitory? Are these the Grenadian workers? And these things need to be addressed before we start constructing. There are a lot of other environmental problems I may not have time to deal with. But when you review matters like that, we need to find out, get to the bottom of these things, and basically decide exactly who is going to do what, how many people are going to be working here, and what jobs are we going to get. So yeah, I know you have to continue, but
absolutely. But you talk about the expansive nature of that particular website, and in my digging and research, not website, sorry, resort. In my digging and research on what the scope of this thing would look like, there is this website that I happened upon. It's called prichards.co, and these are the renderings that they have advertised for the area. Now, my knowledge of Grenadian rules with respect to the construction of buildings is that it can't be taller than a coconut tree or a palm tree. I do not know if that rule still exists, given that these are the renderings. So if you look at this, and I would go on to cite what the website says here. It says the Grenada National Resort is a world-class resort development. The project is located in Liverpool. We know that. It will be made up of a luxury hotel, 18-hole golf course, amusement park, and yacht marina. Speaking of yacht marina, that area, of course, is also known as a safe habitat for turtles, for leatherback turtles, which nest there during nesting season. And it talks about the cost of investing in that hotel. Single applicant, $285,000 US. Couple, $293,000 US. Couple plus one child, $295,000 US. Couple plus two children, $297,000. Couple plus three. There all of these packages here. Of course, that's also part of the CBI program, and we seem to see the same model being unfolded in La Sagesse as well. How realistic is this project really for that area?
The project is not realistic for the big area, and the selling point, clearly that the CBI program is using it as a selling point. I don't see that ever fitting into that location. The 3-story towers that they mentioned here, they were originally set at 19, and then I think certain groups started complaining about the heights, and then they said it's going to be reduced to 16 stories. But I'm glad you brought up the turtle watching. I mean, this is a very big part of our ecotourism thing. Now, the lights from these buildings would affect turtle laying and nesting on the beach. Many years ago, I can't remember exactly, when the first golf course was attempted, there was silt and clay that was washed from the coast after it was excavated, and it went onto the beach, and turtle did not nest that year. They couldn't nest because of the silt and the runoff from the beach. The pond, the Liberal pond that is there, we are anticipating runoff into the pond too, because the EIA does not have any plan how you're going to mitigate that. How you're going to treat your wastewater, how you're going to deal with all sorts of runoff and other environmental issues that's going to be there. It does not deal in detail about the road that's there. It does not deal with how you're going to provide power, adequate power for it. So when you look at the project of that magnitude, we need to ask the question, what are the infrastructural needs of that project? And where are we going to get the power? Is Grenada going to do a special substation up there? What is going to happen to the rest of St. Patrick's? You cannot have enough solar panels to power that. If you're going to have a desalination plant, all of that would require a great consumption of electricity. So the project looks great on paper, but in reality, as you see, it's not practical, and the pollutant effects of that project, that's a Ramsar area. It's supposed to be a designated marine protected environment, which hasn't taken effect. What they have done in the EIA, they have reduced the area for the Ramsar site. The Ramsar site went out to the islands, and it came back around Bedford Point and further north and west. Now, in the EIA, they have narrowed it just to decide that, okay, they're going to put the project in a certain area, and they reduce the size of the Ramsar site. In doing that, they have put a seal that was purportedly, the seal is purportedly off the Ministry of Agriculture, but when you do a seal and a document, there must be a signature and a date. It was just a blank seal. So I can take a stamp and stamp it there. That's what is portrayed on the EIA. We don't know if it's real. We have in the EIA species of birds that you have never seen in Grenada, but all of that is the data that is not, I don't know where it was extracted from, but this is what is proposed in the EIA. And hopefully the EIA would be reviewed by the appropriate ministries in government, and that they would do the right thing and to have a lot of items there corrected before people would start development. And I can't give much assurance of that because the Gulf Coast is starting and there's no EIA for the Gulf Coast. You can't start a project without an EIA. And we know that Gulf Coasts have very, very negative impact on the environment. And there's no EIA for that at this time.
And let me bring back Dr. Hannah here, and we're talking about archaeology in the St. Patrick area. Have you been able to do any research in the Livera area in particular with respect to archaeological finds there? And do you think that project would have any impact on that as well?
Well, unfortunately, from what I understand, there was a big site there, but most of it was destroyed in like somewhere around 2004 or so when that first golf course attempt. I mean, they made major changes to Livera, even cutting off part of the pond. You got the back pond now, and just leveled the whole area. There's push piles that are now overgrown. So that site, actually, there's an artist nearby, Dolliver. He actually had retrieved a bunch of artifacts, and I was at his little shop there once, and he was showing me these things, and he said he got them all from Livera, and it turns out he had like a huge collection of stuff that he had been collecting from there, and it's all that remains of that site. So he donated it to the museum like last year or the year before, and so that's like all we have of that site. I think there should be more done to confirm that. The little that I've done around Livera, I mean, there's historic stuff around, especially on the east side of the pond. There's also a historic well, but I think on where the resort side, but I think a lot of it was destroyed years ago. But that's not even mentioned in that EIA, from what I understand. Another weird thing in that EIA, from what I've seen, was they did these community surveys, and they're really bizarre, but like 100% of the respondents were concerned about archaeology in the Livera area. 100%. And that was the only time it was mentioned. It just presents it, and there's no mitigation. Well, what should be done? Like Val was just saying, like, you just present this fact, and then there's no plan for fixing it, right? And that's the whole point of an EIA, is actually to make it better, to make the development better, so that you don't run into these problems and you save some piece of something that didn't need to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, and I'm going to bring back Mr. Douglas here, one of the things that has always, I suppose, confused me is the notion that companies who are developing these projects hire their own consultants to conduct these EIAs. And I'm wondering what kind of work is done to peer review these EIA projects, right? How do we validate that data? How do we validate that research? And that is, of course, where the physical planet unit is supposed to come in. Is that something you are concerned about, Mr. Douglas?
Very concerned about it, and I'll tell you why. When you have development that is being funded by finance, by international organization, a bank, whatever, these entities have terms of reference that dictate guidelines, procedures that you must go through in getting a professional EIA done, right? The Caribbean Development Bank, for example, would never finance a project unless they get an EIA, review it, and approve it, because there's a risk, major risk, that the project, if it does environmental damage in the future and it closes down, they would have a loss. The situation with the CBI program allows these developers to choose their EIAs because we lack the guidelines in planning that says what professional person must conduct an EIA. And even though planning has guidelines that say it has to be reviewed by various different ministries, fisheries, agriculture, forestry, and everyone should have an input. In the past, that has not happened with the EIA for some of our projects. So if these projects were being financed by international organization, wouldn't have a problem because the banks would make sure to it that we have a professional EIA. And we're not getting that in Grenada currently on these developments. And it exposes us to a lot of risk. We have seen examples of that in Lasages, where EIA was done, nothing was being monitored, no standards was there. Bentec reports, which was supposed to be for the marine area, thing was done, but this is ignored. And when you have that, what we have prescribed, and no one has taken up yet, was that we are saying that get professional EIA, the developer must pay for it, but the EIA, the professional has to be hired by government and not by the developer, and that professional must report to the government and let the government accept it before the development may proceed. So we hope that government would take our recommendation seriously.
This is very this is just very heavy and depressing for me personally. For someone who studies climate justice and climate change, it's just a lot. So what we want to do, folks, is to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we are going to just wrap up this segment and get to a final guest for today's episode of the Bubb Report. So please stand by. The next segment of the Bubb Report comes to you compliments S.A. Johnson Funeral Home. They are a Caribbean family-owned funeral service. They offer a full range of funeral services at affordable prices in New York City. They can be reached on 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity. Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Bubb Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG-10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching. And welcome back, folks. At this point, we want to bring back the panelists for this particular segment. And Mr. Douglas, of course, we will be keeping an eye on that court litigation. You said the High Court, is it the OECS Supreme Court, would be in Grenada?
The Court of Appeals.
The Court of Appeal, yes, the Court of Appeal.
And their next appearance is next month.
Next month, okay. So we will be keeping an eye on that. Any closing comments from me before we get to the next segment, Mr. Douglas?
Sure. I think, we look at the environment, but we needed everyone's involvement. And I think I have almost like an appeal here to make in the closing remarks, because we're experiencing environmental crisis here, particularly in our coastal areas. Over the years, we've enacted laws with little or no regulations. We have failed miserably at enforcement with regulations where they do exist. We have designated protected areas, but have engaged in little or no oversight. We have entered into treaties, agreements, and international accords on the environment. But these appear to be more for the preservation of the papers on which they were written, rather than to preserve and sustain our heritage, environment, and natural resources. It seems that we are cloaked in symbolism rather than in real actions. There are many public servants in various ministries and statutory bodies, community service organizations, and NGOs who are working tirelessly to preserve and maintain a sustainable environment. but they are hamstrung by the upper echelons of government that have failed to provide adequate resources. This trend shouldn't continue. We call on the administration, this current administration, to change this trend and to make environmental protection, particularly of the coastal and marine areas, a priority. We, the people, also need to get serious about environmental and heritage protection. Our clock on environmental degradation has passed midnight. We are very late, but to save ourselves, we must act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. And Dr. Hannah, over to you.
Yeah, I can't agree more with Val there. One thing I'm just thinking about during this program generally is, Grenada is, a place where there's still interesting traditional things happening. Really, I mean, we're losing things all the time, culturally, environmentally. And yeah, I'm a white foreigner, with American accents. I hope people can see through that sort of social barrier and hear what, because it is important. There are things here that are still happening and that aren't happening elsewhere. Every couple of weeks in the market, I go by this lady right out front of Foodland. Actually, she sells like bush tea and stuff. Actually, and like things to make like under the counter rum and like little packets of things you just add your own. Like, man, that is so cool and interesting and heartbreaking. As this little old lady is the only place to find that. I mean, there are other people selling, but what happens when she's no longer around? What do we lose? And what happens when the environment? I mean, she's out there foraging for bobbin-day and stuff. Like, just that's a wild tree that people harvest from. What happens when there's no more of that? And like it's like we lose something about what makes Grenada, what makes Grenadians Grenadian, right? The unique, distinct aspects of this place and what hooks people when they come, like me. It's like, forget about these stupid hotels. It's destroying the very thing that we want to preserve, that brings people here. I think the hotel capacity is already well above its the requirements right now, and putting something like that in a former national park there's no need for these 500-room towers. But to get back even to South Harris Bay, and that's sort of a predictor of what's going to keep happening. And Levera is another one, and Las Ejes and Mount Hartman. These. I'm not saying there shouldn't be hotels or there shouldn't be development. It's what's the point of development, right? Is it the fact that you built this big piece of concrete, or was it the process that we went through to get it? It's the fact that we preserved that coral reef and we built silt traps so that the erosion didn't go out into the sea, that we preserved this forest, that we preserved the archaeological site nearby, or maybe some of it was destroyed, but we excavated it properly and we learned a whole bunch about this place. That and the people who could do it, who could be doing these things, are Grenadians. I mean, how many Grenadians study marine biology? There's a biology program at SGU. How many get jobs here in that field afterwards? I mean, these EIAs are a whole nother industry, a whole nother way of employing the best and brightest to reduce the brain drain and to keep this place, what makes it so special. And that also accounts for the archaeological sites and these time capsules that are just everywhere. And once you destroy it, it's gone forever. It's like, we should look at it before it's destroyed and just to see what it is, not
wanting to cut you, but there is a comment here which I'm compelled to respond to from Benedict Rouget. I don't know, so I'm asking, who are these gentlemen employed with? I get their point, but why are they so late with their comments? Mr. Rouget, I would correct you here. The Bubb Report, back in 2020, in fact, when the Bubb Report was first inaugurated in May or June of 2020, we actually produced a program very similar to this, we actually had the land actors, Mr. Douglas's group, to appear on the program. We had the turtle conservationists appearing on this program who raised the alarm on this issue. We also had other environmental activists from St. Patrick's who have been raising the alarm on this issue. Dr. Hanna has been doing extensive research for many years. He's actually just produced his dissertation. This is not something that these people have woke up yesterday to decide that they're going to do. This is something that they've been doing for years, and they have been raising the alarm where that has been concerned for many years. This has absolutely nothing to do with a change of government. This has been a very consistent position that they have maintained, because there appears to be a lot of whataboutism in Grenada. Well, you have a new government now, but you are not saying those things when the previous government was there, when in fact these environmental activists have been saying so for a long time. I just thought I needed to make that point. I'm sorry to interrupt what your trend of thought, but Dr. Hanna, I thought I needed to make that point. Please proceed.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, if people were to look back at, they would see that it has been raised for a long time. I mean, the land actors lawsuit started in 2020, I believe, and was a response to a year prior of attempts to intervene and stop things from getting out of control. So I mean, I am hopeful that the change in government has a sort of positive impact. I mean, one thing about Mr. Andel, who was here previously, I don't think his agenda is to build a luxury yacht marina in Salters Bay, which was apparently the part of the plan, according to the 2016 Blue Economy report. The Salters Bay was going to be this big luxury thing.
Correct.
I don't think
that Breakwater project would just be the first phase of that.
That's the only place you could see where it came from. It just came out of the blue, but that's the only place you could refer to see what they were doing. They messed up and they stopped it, apparently. So I think the new government is genuine in their attempts to sort of fix things. But of course, we have to help guide them along. I hope they do listen to some of the experts, not just myself, but there's marine ecologists and all people that are really interested in this and have something to say. And of course, they can't fix everything all at once. We're looking at years and years, decades of neglect. So, yeah.
Dr. Hanna, finally, what drew you to Grenada? What was unique about Grenada that you felt the need to conduct research on the island?
Well, I came in 2010 as a Peace Corps volunteer, and actually I worked in Ministry of Youth at first and met a lot of great people there. I would say the thing that really caught me at first was I was attached to a school, the St. George's Methodist School, it's a primary school. I helped set up a computer lab, and that was just a really rewarding experience. Best job I ever had, basically. And in the process, I met Mr. Michael Jessame, who's in the Ministry of Tourism. And, I had done archaeology prior to coming to the Peace Corps. And so he was interested in in doing something. And we did a project by St. John's River in Queens Park, which was an archaeological site. And it was like a summer program it was like grades 4 through Form 3 or something. And like that project and those kids really did, it just brought me back. And I was like, I want to keep doing this. So I went to grad school afterwards and did my dissertation on the archaeology of Grenada. It was actually a big survey of all the sites. And so now we're trying to do some more of these community archaeology programs. So we have one at Salters Bay we've been doing. We did one at La Sagesse that was funded by the developer, so to their credit. And I want to, continue to do those types of programs and get people interested and involved, and ideally the museum to become part of it, and hopefully it all works out.
All right. Thank you for that important work. As a student of history, I may be showing my bias here, but as a student of history, I certainly appreciate and respect that important work. I believe a people without a knowledge of their history are doomed to repeat it, or doomed to repeat those mistakes. And of course, a country without its history is like a place with no roots. So Dr. Hannah and Mr. Douglas, again, thank you again for appearing on the Bubb Report this week, for shedding some very important light on what is happening. We did not get to what's happening at Lasajas, but that would require a subsequent program. And of course, I trust that especially Mr. Douglas, you would be flexible enough to come back and join us for that segment.
Certainly. Thank you for the opportunity, and have a good day to you and the listeners and viewers. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you too.
Viewers and listeners, please stand by. We will take one quick break, and we have Mr. Francis Uraz Peters waiting here. Uncle Yuyu, as I call you, I apologize for taking up a large chunk of your day, because I know that you are preparing for that place. So we'll take a quick break, and we will be right back. And welcome back, viewers and listeners. If you have not had an opportunity to share this program, kindly do so, because some very valuable information was disseminated here by our previous panelists. But at this point, we want to segue into a conversation around independence. But that conversation would surround, I suppose, a theatrical conversation around independence. Francis, we just had an opportunity to play a clip from one of your previous plays. You are not new to this, but certainly you are true to this. Yes.
Very, very, very much so. And I think that's a good choice of production. That was done at the Spice Basket Theatre over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm a person who has always said I'm rooted in my folk tradition. And this was a play called Belinda, where we took a number of folk songs. And of course, one of that song that you heard being sung was sung there by Sonaika McKee, was an original Grenadian song. And we put this package together which was well received. So I'm happy that you made that wonderful choice, because we really need to get back in touch with who we are as a people, our cultural traditions, our history, and we have to celebrate it and be proud of who we are, especially as we're heading towards our 50th independence anniversary. That's next year. It is going to be a big one. So we really have to focus a lot on this important issue.
Yep. And you've always infused that grounded Grenadian culture, that sense of Grenadianism, that sense of Grenadian identity in a lot of your plays. Now, there is a play that's coming up that's put on by the Laboucan Center there on Kirani James Boulevard. Could you tell us about that play and how it will reflect that Grenadian aesthetic in the context of our national identity as an independent nation?
Okay, so every first Saturday of the month, the Laboucan Creative Center, we present a production called Calabash Night, because you know the calabash is a very flexible utensil. In the past, you eat, you drink, you bathe from that. So we always serve what I call an interesting and folk element of our culture. And this next week, Saturday, as the 4th of February, we'll be presenting such another production. But it's not really just a full play, but it will be what we call a cultural menu. We'll be serving up. We're going to want to take a trip down memory lane with a monologue from 1993. We'll be celebrating two of our exciting young spoken word artists or poets. That's Rose Bagwan and Aquino. I'm trying to remember Aquino's last name, but Aquino Romain. He will be there. Yes, we'll be also going back to a play that was done in 1992 called Rivals. We'll be doing a 15-minute excerpt from that, so we're going back to the past. You'll be also having a very exciting expose by no other person than Anne, Sister Anne, my wife, and Peters. She'll be taking us down memory lane with a medley of Grenadian calypsos from the 60s and 70s, and also an exciting folk medley, a Caribbean medley. And then the second half of the program, we'll be featuring our vintage live acoustic music, which will be presented by Crystal Laguerre. We have Jonathan Francis, Zelika Peters, and Kevin Bullen. So it will be a really wonderful package that is going to reflect our island music. And as I say, we're going to take a trip down memory lane. It's on Saturday, February the 4th, at Laboucan Creative Center on the Carani James Boulevard, overlooking the lagoon. We are located at the GCNA complex, and it's only $50. It goes towards supporting the artist and to ensure also that we keep the folk culture alive.
And you've been doing great work at the Creative Center there. Well, would this particular production, I guess, highlight some of the turbulence that informed Grenada's road to independence, or are you only going to be focusing on particular musical expressions, artistic expressions that represent the Grenadian aesthetic?
Well, it will be both, because Sister Anne will also be doing a segment of a storytelling segment, which is going to be true stories to take us back down memory lane and what happened in the turbulent 70s. On the road to independence. So she'll be flexible enough to give us an expose on that. Because it's important here that we know the history, know the past, and to see where we have come from. Because of course there were negatives and there were positives also.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with the first Prime Minister, Sir Eric Matugeri. That was a very turbulent past. But when you look back to see, the number of things that he really contributed to the development of Grenada, he has to be given credit. So she'll be giving you a nice expose as a storyteller.
Absolutely. Now let us segue a little bit into, we're hearing a lot of pronouncements with respect to the creative economy and investing in the creative economy. You are, of course, one of Grenada's foremost creatives. When you hear conversations around the creative economy, are you optimistic that we are going to get to a place where we are really going to make serious investment in the creative arts, such that productions that you put on, productions that other playwrights put on in Grenada, would receive the kind of support and prominence that is needed? That's shot in the arm, if you will.
Yeah, very much. I'm very enthused because in in a nutshell, the creative industry, is a very complex industry, but we have to understand here that there are a lot of sub-sectors. And in order for that really to grow, first of all, you see, we have a conversation. There has to be a vision. That's where it started. And I say when we talk about the creative industry, you talk about the performing and the visual arts, you talk about graphic design, computer games, advertising, video productions, music production, etc., etc. We also talked about the heritage sites, which can be developed to provide jobs and to become a sort of source of pride and community support and to bring intangible benefits. So I'm very, very, very excited about that. But in order for that to grow, we know we must have the support. Just like agriculture, it has to be subsidized. We have to encourage the business sector. We have to look for funding for those support. So I'm very enthused to hear that for the very first time, a government is really speaking about developing a creative industry. And not only just for us as performance, but it's also for national development to address our health issues, to address social issues, to address environmental issues. There's nothing that's more powerful than the creative arts. And as I must say, and always say how powerful the creative arts is, like in 1992, when there was no laws on incest that criminalized incest as a crime, we were approached as a theater company and asked to come on board in order to put the government of the day under pressure to really enact legislation that's going to make incest a crime. And we did a play called What's Your Verdict, which was then seen by the former Attorney General, Dr. Francis Alexis, came to the production, and 3 months after, the law was passed. So I'm saying here to address a lot of the issues. I mean, Grenada, yes, is a very safe place, still one of the best places in the world, but we have issues. The excessive consumption of alcohol, sexual crimes. That's a problem. And so I just think here that the creative industry, we have a very important role to play in addressing these issues. But apart from that, to bring jobs, I'm looking forward to the development of the heritage sites, because we have to realize here, I'm saying that tourism is just not about coming into a hotel, but Grenada has such a rich history of forts. We have the history of the Federal Rebellion. Heritage Theatre did a production on the Federal Rebellion. You have one of the estates, the villages where this action took place in Belvedere. Can we do a festival? That's around that rebellion. 1951 Sky Red, that was led by Eric Matthew Geary. Also, you have the Grenada Revolution which ended in 1983. I think this year makes it 40 years. So these are things that we can develop products around. Because so long, often we don't appreciate the sort of spin-off and the intangible impact that these productions can create. So I'm really, really enthused and excited and optimistic that it will happen, but it has to take the collaborative effort. And also, I always say here, we have to bring in the education aspect of it, because to start from the schools, from the homes, and to encourage parents and teachers and the children really to have a grounding in the spin-off of the creative arts, because that's where I started. As a child growing up in St. Andrew, when I went to the St. Giles Anglican School in Mount Carmel, Mr. Crafton Maguire from that folklorist from River Sally every Friday came to the school and taught us folk songs. So that is where my interest started. And here I am. Had it not maybe been for him, I'm not too sure that I would have been involved in the performing arts as I am today.
And credit to you as well. You may not remember this, but credit to you for, I suppose, fostering my confidence in being a good public speaker, because you may not remember this. You were my drama teacher. I took drama at the TMI Community College many moons ago, and you were my drama teacher at that time. I can't remember if we did produce a play out of it, but I do, however, remember learning some very important skills with respect to stage presence and respect to different stage direction and things like that. So credit to you as well. But let us, before you go, recently we lost a great Grenadian, the late Beverly Steele, who to my mind was a great supporter of the arts and a great supporter of theater in Grenada. In fact, Marischal House, the Marischal House Theater became the home, really, of stage plays in the country. And you, in an offline conversation with me, you indicated that she played an important role in impacting your own life as a playwright that we know today. So can you speak to Beverly Steele's legacy in the context of theater in Grenada?
Oh yes, most definitely. So let me just give you a little background story. My first play that I did for the public was in 1983. And then, of course, at that time, I was working at Jonas Brown and Hubbard's, and I started writing. I went to Marischal House because Beverly Steele always encouraged me, because we did our first production there, I think around that same year also, under the auspices of the Christian Dramatic Society. And then in 1984, fellowships were awarded by the OAS, the Organization of American States, in collaboration with some of the Caribbean governments, and Grenada being one of them. And Beverly Steele, recognizing my ability as a young playwright, made a recommendation for me to be given one of those fellowships to go to the Jamaica School of Drama. It's now known as the Edna Manley College of Visual and Performing Arts. And they didn't want to accept me. The OAS to say, well, what is this man who is a cashier at a lumber yard? Why should we give him this fellowship? And she had to, because they were looking for people who were already involved in the arts, and also particularly for teachers, because you have to go to drama and education. And she had to make the point that, listen, yes, in Grenada, you'll find people that not be there full time in the arts, but they're working, and in the afternoons, that's when they apply their trade. So had it not been for Beverly, I would not have been given that opportunity to go to Jamaica to improve myself as a theater artist, director, as a playwright. So I went there, came back in 1986, and here I am now. But I'm saying, had not been for her, I do not think that Grenada would have benefited that much from my services as a theater practitioner. So I have to give her all. Then Marischal House was available. She always supported us, together with Claudia Halley. We got all the support. That way we bust our teeth was the nursery. Almost every theater company, some of them the dance company. That is where we started. So Beverly must be given credit, a great historian and also a person who supported the arts, bless her soul, she rest in peace. And it's important that we remember those who have paved the way for us for the successes that we are repeating, reaping today. And I must say, let's just segue back slightly. Just glad to hear of the influence, and I need to share this with the Grenadian public and those in the diaspora also, that about 3 weeks ago, this young man met me and was saying, Mr. Peters, I was trying to flag you down so many times and you're not stopping. And I wondered what he wanted. And he said he was in prison 25 years ago. And I came there to do a session, I think it was 3 theater sessions where they had to put on a play for Christmas. I barely remembered it. And he said, after you left, Mr. Peters, I decided I was not coming back to this place. And he said, I've been out 25 years now. I am working, and I really want to thank you for the impact that you have made in my life. I've changed my life around. So I'm saying here, this is the importance here of the theater arts, of what the creative industries can do to help to change people's lives for a better future, for a better Grenada.
Absolutely. It's about channeling that positive energy, right? Guiding that energy into a positive direction, because, many times we talk about misguided youth and, these youths are failures. But if we give them these opportunities, certainly there is potential for them to turn around.
Oh, yes, definitely. And that is what, for the remaining life that Papa God has for me on this planet and on this spice, I am committed myself. One of the things I would really love to do as we move forward, hopefully next year, the 50th anniversary, is to go to the schools, to the communities, to restructure a lot of my plays so they can be staged in the community, and maybe the other theater companies also, because we hear, as I say here, theater, drama, even the music and all aspects of the arts have this very important role to play in self-development and to reaching out to our youth and the wider community. That's what I'm trying to do. Also highlight our history, highlight our folklore, our folk culture, and to believe here and to have that self-confidence and that belief to define us as a Grenadian people. That's what my mandate.
Uncle Yuyu, thank you. And can you, for the benefit of audience members who might not have heard, talk to us about the dates of the play, price of admission, location?
Yes. So Calabash Night again, they say next Saturday, the 4th of February at Laboucan Creative Center at on the Carnegie James Boulevard. We are GCNA Complex. It starts at 8 o'clock. Admission is just $50. You can call 440-1353 or 403-1353 to make reservations. You can call my number also, 414-2242. We have tickets on sale. It's a limited space because a very intimate space. We cannot hold 200-300, so we're asking to make your bookings. I believe it will be a wonderful cultural treat here. We're overlooking the beautiful lagoon. Come to get a good cultural menu. We have a bar, we have snacks on sale, we have good conversations even after the play. And we tell you here that this, I think, is going to be one of the best Calabash Night production that you will ever see. If you miss it, then you want to regret it. So we want to thank.
Well, I'm regretting it now because I can hear Auntie Anne's voice now singing.
Oh yeah.
With that gusto,
Yes, man. Oh yes, I mean she always intrigued me. I'm saying that she's a genuine folklorist, possibly one of the genuine folklorists here in Grenada. When she hits that stage, I'll tell you, it's electricity, it is fire. And the younger ones that we have, who we are passing on the baton, I tell you, it is going to be a cultural treat for any age, whether you're a teenager, whether you're a senior citizen, whether you're middle age. We ask you to come out and support the arts, support Laboucan. On the 4th, Saturday the 4th, it's going to be an independent treat.
Absolutely. Francis Uras Peters of the Laboucan Creative Center, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Kalan, and continue doing the great work that you are doing. Really appreciate this.
Absolutely. All right, viewers and listeners, that was Francis Uras Peters talking about a play that will go down memory lane, reflecting on Grenada's 49th anniversary of independence, as the country also looks forward to its 50th anniversary of independence next year. So we thank him for agreeing to appear on the Bubb Report, and of course our earlier panelists who also appeared on the report. Folks, again, it's always my pleasure to host the program on Sundays here, distilling these very important issues. Even though I am domiciled in another country, Grenada is still home, and I feel that it is my duty as a patriotic Grenadian resident abroad to contribute and give back in whatever way that I can by way of journalism. And that is what I will continue to do. So viewers and listeners, I want to thank you again. I can't thank you enough for being active participation, for your continued active participation in the Bubb Report every week. So on behalf of the producers, Rion Charles, again, thank you for your great work this week again, as well as Comrade Kitaka. Thank you again for your amazing work as well. We thank you all for your continued viewership and patronage of the Bubb Report. I am a humble servant, Dr. Kellen Bubb, wishing everyone a safe and productive week. Take care now. Bye-bye.